Hey up, you lot. So I went to my first post-lockdown gig last night. First one I've been to since before the first UK lockdown. It's quite a big wrench. It's quite a big, like, oh my word, big room full of people. But it was like a one-off gig that I don't think will ever happen again. So I went to see the Heaven 17 performing the first two albums by the Human League. So if that sounds baffling to anyone, there was like early Human League that I think are amazing, and then they did one EP and a couple of albums, and then split up. And some of the guys went off and formed Heaven 17, and some of the guys stayed as the Human League, and that's when the whole Don't You Want Me Dare LP era started. And their early stuff is so cool. And it set me off thinking about bands who like their early stuff is quite different from what they're best known for. So I've picked five, as I often do. There's no surprise there. 5 LPs, starting with Travelogue by the Human League. So a lot of people know the kind of Don't You Want Me Baby era of Human League, but before that, they were very bleak and weird, but also insanely poppy. And like, so when I went to see the Heaven 17 last night, they did this album and Reproduction in full, and then obviously a couple of Heaven 17 hits, which to dance to, We Don't Need That Fascist Groove thing, is just brilliant. So Travelogue is their second LP, and it's kind of difficult to explain the whole thing. Now, I was too young to be into the Human League back in, I think this is 1980. Yeah, 1980. So, at the time, I mean, they toured with Susie and the Banshees, Stranglers, Iggy Pop, and they were seen as edgy, futuristic, almost like electro punks, a bit like melodic early cabaret Voltaire. Now, it wasn't just musically, their lyrics. I'm going to read you some lyrics from a song I adore on this album called A Crow and a Baby, which is very, very bleak sounding minimal synths. And then this is one of the verses, but it's very small red writing on a yellow background, so my eyes are kind of going blah, 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 blah. I'm just trying to tell you what you'll come up against if you venture from my side. If you think you're so mature, you'll end up in the field. You'll be someone's manure, mushrooms growing from your back, feeding some damn carrion bird. Do you want to contribute to the corruption of the world? So, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, if you're trying to pull Sharon at Roxy's on 10p a pint night, don't you want me on the dance floor, don't you? Because that's like, yeah, let's have a dance, love. Not like A Crow and a Baby, which is genius. I mean, they had some commercial success. There's a track on this called Gordon's Gin, which was used on it's a music from a Gordon's Gin advert, which is a instrumental electro pop, but slightly bleak sounding, but catchy as hell, instrumental, wonderful song. And when they played it last night, I have to say the guys from the Heaven 17 just nailed it last night. It was brilliant. And I'm still recovering a little bit today. But that's the sign of a good gig, isn't it? You know, if you're when you get to kind of that middle age, when you're younger, you can just keep going all night. Gig's done. Let's go out. Let's keep going. But as those years creep on and you go to a gig, you need the day after just so your knees and your throat and your feet just recover a little bit. But it's a very interesting album and catchy and unusual, and I can see why the kind of Top of the Pops commercial success didn't really happen that much with that. There was a hit on it. Being Boiled was a hit. The only song I can think of that talks about sericulture, and I remember having to look up what sericulture means because it's not something that crops up in pop songs a lot. So this is the album that set me off thinking, who else? This is one of the 5, by the way. But what other albums are a detraction from like what bands or performers get really well known for? So number 2 is another one of my all-time favourite albums. These are all pretty much post-punk. Glenn, mate, yeah, post-punk. Dirt Wears White Socks, Adam and the Ants. Now, I know things changed because of a lineup change. So this version of Adam and the Ants, they all kind of went their separate ways. Adam Ant carried on as Adam Ant. But we got some really cool bands out of this lineup. So some of the guys went off to form Bow Wow Wow. Some of the other guys went off to form the Monochrome Set. So this band was brilliant. And when it broke up, we got some equally brilliant bands, in my humble opinion. So Dirt Wears White Socks is kind of post-punk funk almost. I mean, they didn't hide the fact that they wanted to do a bit of a funky album. But it's tempered with Adam Ant's kind of biting and darkly humorous lyrics. So there's a little snatch of lyrics from The Idea, which contains some politically dubious, not politically correctly, yeah. If you know the song, you know the bit I mean. But it's, I could be religious if you didn't have to kneel down. I could be religious if God would say hello. I could be religious if an angel touched my shoulder. I could be religious if they set the hymns to disco. And again, I've talked about this before, and I don't criticise anyone for putting aside that kind of edgy, strange, post-punk thing and aiming for Top of the Pops. Whatever you do, you want to be successful in. And with my work, if I see trends appearing, then I embrace that. And it's kind of like, that's what's popular now, so I'll incorporate some of that into some of my designs. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money and moving away from the kind of cool and edgy post-punk strangeness and setting your sights on Top of the Pops, because that's where the money is. And there's no point doing stuff as a job if you're not going to get paid. And I do love, I love the latest stuff that Adam Ant put out. His gigs are always weird. I don't know if any of you lot have been to an Adam Ant gig, like kind of more recently. But there's an odd dichotomy, because Adam Ant embraces all this stuff. And the B-sides of his singles that were kind of back to being the punky stuff, that was my first introduction. One of the first records I got was Stand and Deliver, and the B, back when I was a nipper, and the B-side is Beat My Guess, like a song about S&M that was my first taste of punk. And I remember listening to Stand and Deliver, and I wanted to dress up as Adam Ant and be a highwayman, and I loved it. And then on my mum's old big Dan set, flipped it over, put the B-side on, and it's this fast, angry, punky anthem to the joy of being like flogged and beaten up. And little tiny me was a bit like, but I didn't quite understand the lyrics, but it was the speed and energy of the music, and I'm like, this isn't rock. This isn't what my parents listened to. This is something different. And that early Adam and the Ants stuff some of it is just amazing. But yeah, at gigs, it's a right weird dichotomy, because you get like, there's a load of old punks go, and there's a load of kind of like later middle-aged mums that go in the brocade jackets and the white stripe on the nose, which I'm not criticising, because Adam Ant is best well known for that kind of music and image. But they all kind of sit down when he plays like Xerox and You're So Physical and Press Darlings and that. And there's all these old punks down at the front kind of going, yes, this is it. And then it switches. He'll kind of do, you know, Prince Charming. And all the old punks go to the bar and all the mums are down the front going, yeah, this is it. It's so funny. But like I said, I'm not criticising anyone for a period in a performer's career that you identify with and adore. I just kind of love it all. So yeah, that's another one that the band broke up and everything changed. The sound changed and the style and the approach changed. So next up is one of the like key albums in the soundtrack to my life, and it's Tubeway Army's first album. Now, obviously, if you don't know, Tubeway Army then kind of essentially just became Gary Newman, not necessarily just on his own, because... So Tubeway Army had 2 albums out as Tubeway Army and Replicas, and then Gary Newman changed everything round. Some of the guys stayed with him and became kind of like his backing band, and then he became Gary Newman, and again seemed to chase that pop dream and move away from that kind of punk, post-punk kind of thing. Not criticising anyone for that, as I keep saying. I'll stop saying that. You know my opinion on that now. So this is so dystopian. So dystopian. Genuinely dystopian. And when I first moved out of my parents' house into my first grotty, grim, one-room bedsit, me and my friends, we were just about all unemployed, and the future felt very bleak. And this album lyrically is quite bleak. There's nothing warm and cozy about it. And we used to listen to this LP constantly. Because we weren't working, we were just kind of dossers. We used to sleep a lot during the day, sleeping off the after effects of whatever substances we could afford, and then go out at night, just like walking around the city, the floodlit, spotlit city. And this album seems to be, in my memories of it, which is not necessarily complete, it's almost like a soundtrack to that dystopian life that we had. And then we all got our asses in gear and looked at how we could actually get a career and start earning some money and what we actually wanted to do. But Tubeway Army's really... They are one of my favourite bands. And I've got a CD compilation called The Plan, which is like a collection of stuff that... Some of it was issued as like, I think like 4 and 6 track 12-inch singles. So they started off really, really, really punky. And then for the first LP, Gary Newman... Gary Webb, bless him, brought in like a mini Moog. So it was still punky, but with this kind of... the mini Moog, the settings they had on it, it was quite harsh sounding and a really square wave to the sound. And it works. It really works for me. And then you could see pop aspirations creeping in with Replicas. And then obviously Gary Newman became Gary Newman. Now I've got the first couple of Newman LPs for his solo LPs, and I do like them, but, and I'm not just being, you guys kind of starting to get a measure. If you just stay for vinyl, you guys are starting to get a measure of me now, and I'm not I don't really follow fads and trends and like, oh, their early stuff is cool, but then they became commercial. It's not that. I get that people have to become commercial, but this kind of bleak, again, post-punk, guitar-driven music with that mini moog sound, oh, it's so good. But things got changed up, and things progressed musically. I think Gary Newman wanted to move away from punk. I remember reading an interview with him where he said he hated the when Tubeway Army were a punk band and they supported other upcoming punk bands and stuff. He hated the spitting and the violence and all that kind of stuff. He eventually, I think he stopped performing as Tubeway Army when the LPs came out because he didn't like the aggressive atmosphere at gigs and stuff. Which, if you've been to like a punk gig, I'm sure you've experienced something like that. So next is another performer that I really, really like. Well, it's a band actually, but people think it's the performer, but we'll get into that. That started off in a really interesting way and then changed things up to embrace that pop success. And it's Toyah. So this is their first album. Now, this was back when Toyah was the band. The first few albums were Toyah as a band. And I always thought that was a really big mistake, calling a band of equal members after the singer, because that's all you're gonna think it's Toyah as a solo performer. You know, like Susie and the Banshees, if they were just called Susie, you would think it was more like her and then the band separate. But back when Toyah were Toyah, it was the band. And I do think I really like some of the stuff after this. I think Blue Meaning's a great album. I really like that. But immediately after this LP came out, you can see the pop influences and aspirations creeping in, rather than the post-punk guitar with synths-driven kind of thing. And there's some experimentally stuff on this. Victims of the Riddle is a bit of an odd one. That would never have made it onto Top of the Pops. But I think this still holds a bit of Toyah's like roots. So from like when she was in Jubilee and she did that single came out as the Man-Eaters. If you haven't heard that, there's is it 9 to 5 by the Man-Eaters? I've got it in a singles box somewhere. It's Toyah and Adam and making a punky racket. It's just, I'm a big Adamant fan. I'm quite a medium-sized Toyah fan, so it's just so cool to have that record. But yeah, this is worth checking out for that kind of post-punk, very interesting, but still quite melodic thing going on. Toyah's got like a great vocal style that I think really suits more harder guitar sounds. Obviously, before she progressed to the whole it's a mystery type thing. And again, not criticising anyone for taking that route, because I probably would if I was a pop star, which I'm not, thankfully. And last but not least, which is slightly later, we're looking more about 1983. Or did they break up in 83? I think it's kind of 81 to 83 kind of period. Is the Southern Death Cult. I've been a fan of the Southern Death Cult for absolutely years. Now, they never released an album as Southern Death Cult. This is like a compilation of the A's and B sides of the singles, BBC sessions, and a couple of live bits and bobs. And if you get the CD of this, there's actually a little bit more. I've got the CD somewhere. Simply because there's more tracks on it. So the history, if you don't know the Southern Death Cult, they after they broke up as Southern Death Cult, they became Death Cult, and then they became The Cult, and then obviously did the big stadium rock type thing, which, again, I'm not trying to sound like a cool hipster, but I've done stadium gigs. I've been to stadium gigs. Sorry, I've not performed at stadiums, obviously. I've been to stadium gigs, and if you love that, that's cool. But I just love a little club with a little band in, and they're right there, screaming and shouting and making a racket, and there's 50 people all around you, all bashing into each other. That, for me, all my most adored and favourite gigs that are locked away in me memory gig vault, my Ronco brain tank, like, they're the ones that I kind of like. That was rock and roll. There's one particular one, seeing the first Moon Landings gig at a little kind of converted cinema in Sheffield, and yeah, the band were literally like right there. The room wasn't big enough for the amount of people that turned up. There was a lot of fights. It started to get a little bit out of hand. But me and my girlfriend came out of that gig going like, that was rock and roll. That's what it's about. Anyway, I digress. Sorry. So the Southern Death Cult took a lot of imagery and inspiration for their lyrics, and even down to their style, from like Native American culture, but not in a like village people, let's wear a big headdress kind of way, in a more subtle way. And it worked. And I remember seeing these guys on the Tube, and they seemed edgy and dangerous and threatening and exciting, and all the things that attracted me to wanting to listen to music and go to gigs. Southern Death Cult had it all. And then things didn't really work out. They kind of split up and went their separate ways, reformed as Death Cult, and that's when Ian Astbury met Billy Duffy, and that whole moving on towards the cult thing was born, who obviously, yeah, they had big hits as the Cult, and you can't knock anybody for that, but that's always on my list of bands I'd love to have seen, that I'm probably never going to get to see. You know, it always comes up in pub conversations. Who would you have loved to have seen? Southern Death Cult. I would love to have been at a Southern Death Cult gig. Like, early days in Bradford. I'm a Yorkshire bloke. I still live in Yorkshire. I'm quite fond of Yorkshire. So, like, they're from, you know, Bradford's their hometown. So I'd love to have seen them in the early days in Bradford. But again, nothing like the Cult with that huge success stadium rock thing. This is something a lot darker, a lot more kind of rhythmic and intense. Maybe even influenced a little bit by bands like Bow Wow Wow, and keeping that kind of rhythmic percussion going. I know all percussion's rhythmic, that's a stupid thing to say. But I was at a gig last night and I'm recovering. I did a lot of dancing, I did a lot of shouting, I did a lot of singing and a lot of clapping. So just forgive me. So this week, I was going to say what's Victor been up to. Victor's been watching conspiracy videos on YouTube. And I've just spent the past hour making him a little tinfoil hat and following him gently around the house, trying to drop it on his head. But as you can see, it didn't work. Because that's my Sundays now, just gently following my cat round, trying to drop a little tinfoil hat on him. And I couldn't come up with another idea to include Victor. So anyway, I'll leave it there, because my voice is going again. And I think I need another cup of tea because it's Sunday and I've only had about 7 so far. And I need to top my tannin levels up. So, thank you for watching, you lovely lot. If you fancy joining me for some ridiculous retro sleazy horror paperback chat, I'll be back here on Wednesday. Or if it's just the vinyl you're interested in, I'll see you lovely lot next Sunday.